A diamond necklace worth $2 million can buy many things: a moment of pleasure, a promise of loyalty, a secret kept in the shadows of New York's elite. For tech millionaire Nathaniel Caldwell, it was the ultimate gesture for his beautiful mistress, a glittering symbol of the new life he was about to build. But he made one catastrophic mistake. He bought the diamonds from the wrong jeweler. Or rather, he bought them from the right one without ever realizing the woman he was betraying, his quiet, pregnant wife, was not just a spectator in his life. She was the architect of the very empire he was plundering. And tonight, she wasn't coming to plead. She was coming to collect. The air in the Caldwell penthouse on the 85th floor of 157 was so sterile, it hummed. It was the kind of silence that cost a fortune, engineered to keep the chaos of Manhattan a distant, glittering abstraction. From this height, the city lights looked like a spill of jewels on black velvet, a view Nathaniel "Nate" Caldwell considered his birthright, despite having only acquired it 5 years ago. Nate adjusted the knot of his Brioni tie, his reflection staring back from the floor-to-ceiling window, sharp, confident, a master of his universe. His company, Nexus Dynamics, had just revolutionized data compression algorithms, and the world had rewarded him with a 9-figure valuation. He was the man who could shrink the world into a manageable size, and he applied the same principle to his life. Everything and everyone had its place. His wife Genevieve was currently in her place, curled on a sprawling white Roche Beaubois sofa, a book resting on the gentle swell of her 6-month pregnancy. To Nate, she was a portrait of serene domesticity. Beautiful, quiet, intelligent in a soft academic way, a graduate of art history from a small, prestigious liberal arts college. She was the perfect accessory to his life, a woman of understated class whose old but not wealthy family from upstate New York provided the perfect stable backdrop to his explosive success. She grounded him, he told his friends. What he meant was, she never challenged him. "Still reading about dusty pots and pans, Jen?" he asked, his voice echoing slightly in the cavernous living room. He didn't wait for an answer, walking over to the marble-topped bar to pour himself a glass of Macallan 25. The amber liquid was the color of his ambition. Genevieve looked up her eyes, a calm sea-glass green, holding his for a moment. "It's a catalogue raisonné of 18th century French silverwork," she said, her voice soft but precise. "There's a fascinating piece on the provenance of the Delacour Royal Commission." "Right. Delacour," Nate scoffed lightly. "Your family's one claim to fame. Distant cousins of some fancy jewelers. You should use that connection, you know. Get us some nice things with a family discount." He winked, but the suggestion was a command dressed in charm. He'd brought it up before. He found her lack of interest in leveraging her lineage infuriatingly naive. Genevieve's smile was faint, a brief flicker. "It doesn't really work that way, Nate. It's a very, very distant relation." She placed a hand over her belly, a protective, unconscious gesture. The baby kicked a small tremor only she could feel. "Everything works that way if you have enough leverage," he countered, swirling the scotch. "You just don't know how to play the game." He saw her as a beautiful, delicate thing that needed his guidance, his protection from the sharp-edged world he so easily conquered. Her quiet life, her volunteer work at the museum, her disinterest in the savage ballet of Wall Street, it was all evidence of a charming simplicity he was beginning to outgrow. Lately, he'd been craving something sharper, more vibrant, someone who understood the game. Someone like Katerina. Katerina Petrov was a thunderclap in a quiet room. A gallery curator with eyes the color of lapis lazuli and an ambition that burned as brightly as his own. She saw him not as a provider, but as a partner in conquest. She didn't want to be grounded. She wanted to fly with him higher and higher until the rest of the world was just a blur. "Listen," Nate said, setting his glass down with a decisive click. "Cancel your plans for tomorrow night. I'm taking you somewhere special. Just us." Genevieve's brows furrowed slightly. "Tomorrow? But it's the annual Delacour Foundation Gala. I'm on the committee. I was hoping you'd finally come with me this year." Nate waved a dismissive hand. "Another stuffy charity dinner." "No thanks. I've made other arrangements, much more exclusive. A private dinner celebrating the new Aura restaurant launch. It's impossible to get a table, but I pulled some strings." He puffed out his chest slightly. His world was one of pulled strings and exclusive access. Hers was one of dusty books and forgotten obligations. A shadow passed over Genevieve's face, so quick he almost missed it. "The Delacour Gala is important to my family, Nate. And this dinner is important to our future," he lied smoothly. "I'll be closing a deal there. It's a power move. You'll understand." He walked over and kissed the top of her head, a perfunctory gesture of ownership. "Wear something simple. I'll have a car for you at 8. He didn't notice the way her hand tightened on her book, the knuckles turning white. He didn't see the long, contemplative look she gave his reflection in the window. After he'd walked away, his phone already in hand, a text message being typed with practiced speed. The text was to Katerina. "Tomorrow night, our celebration. I have a surprise for you that will light up the entire city." In the quiet of the penthouse, surrounded by the trappings of a life he had built, Nathaniel Caldwell was completely blind. He saw the gilded cage, but he had no idea who held the key. He thought his wife was a quiet bird he had captured, when in reality she was the silent owner of the entire forest, and the forest was about to reclaim its own. The Delacour Jewelers' flagship store was not merely a shop. It was a sanctuary of light and legacy, a formidable limestone edifice on Fifth Avenue. Its bronze doors were polished to a mirror shine, and the discreetly armed guards out front looked more like couture models than security. Inside, the air was scented with a faint custom fragrance of white tea and freesia, and the silence was broken only by the hushed, reverent whispers of the clientele and the soft click of a vault. Nate Caldwell strode in like he owned the place, a feeling he carried with him into every room he entered. He ignored the polite greeting from the floor manager, his eyes scanning for the man he'd spoken to on the phone. He was here for the grand gesture, the ultimate surprise for Katerina. He was here to purchase the Midnight Star. It was a necklace that had caused a stir even among the city's jaded elite. A flawless 50-carat pear-shaped black diamond suspended from a cascade of smaller, brilliant-cut white diamonds set in platinum. It was audacious, dramatic, and impossibly expensive. It was, in a word, everything Katerina aspired to be. A senior salesman, a man named Mr. Dubois, with silver hair and an impeccably tailored suit, glided towards him. "Mr. Caldwell, a pleasure. We have the piece ready for you in the private viewing salon." Nate followed him into a secluded room, upholstered in grey velvet. There on a black bust lay the Midnight Star. It didn't sparkle so much as it drank the lighter vortex of pure, dark elegance. Nate felt a jolt of triumph. This was power. This was a statement no one could ignore. "It's magnificent," Dubois said, his voice a low murmur. "It'll do." Nate replied, affecting an air of nonchalance. He let a beat of silence pass before leaning in conspiratorially. Now about the price. I believe there might be some room for a professional courtesy. Dubois's placid expression didn't flicker. Sir, the price is as we discussed, $2,150,000. Nate gave a low chuckle. Let's cut the formalities, Dubois. My wife is Genevieve Caldwell, née de la Cour. I think her maiden name should ring a bell in a place like this. He paused for effect. I'm family. For the first time, a subtle change occurred in Mr. Dubois's demeanor. It wasn't deference. It was a kind of watchful stillness, his eyes becoming remarkably opaque. He clasped his hands behind his back. Ah, yes. Mrs. Caldwell, Dubois said, his tone perfectly level. A wonderful woman. We have the utmost respect for her. And for the de la Cour name, of course. Good, Nate said, smiling. So the family discount. What are we talking? 15, 20%. Mr. Dubois cleared his throat softly. Sir, with all due respect, our pricing is fixed. The integrity of a de la Cour piece is absolute from its creation to its valuation. To offer a discount would be to suggest its initial worth was somehow inflated. He said the last word as if it were a mild profanity. We do not haggle. Nate's smile tightened. This was not going according to plan. The man's politeness felt like a stone wall. Listen, I'm not some tourist. I'm her husband. Genevieve de la Cour's husband. Indeed, sir. Dubois replied, his voice still unnervingly calm. And it is precisely out of respect for the de la Cour name and for Mrs. Caldwell that we must maintain the standard of integrity set by our founder over a century ago. The price is the price for everyone. The subtext was clear, though Nate was too arrogant to fully grasp it. The respect was for her, not for him. The rules were for everyone, and that included the man who had married into a name he clearly didn't understand. Frustrated and slightly humiliated, Nate felt a surge of anger. He was Nathaniel Caldwell. People bent to him. Fine, he snapped, pulling out his centurion card. Ring it up, but I expect the full service. Discretion is paramount. No statements sent to my home office. No calls. The receipt will be sent to a private email, and the box is to be delivered by a private courier to a separate address this afternoon. Of course, Mr. Caldwell, Dubois said, taking the card. Discretion is the very foundation of our business. His expression was unreadable, but as he turned to process the transaction, a young apprentice who was shadowing him caught his eye. Dubois gave a minuscule, almost imperceptible shake of his head. A silent instruction that carried a universe of meaning within the hallowed walls of de la Cour. Later that afternoon, as Nate took delivery of the heavy lacquered box at a private mailbox he kept for his more sensitive affairs, he felt a renewed surge of power. He had the necklace. He had the girl. He had the world at his feet. He dismissed the stiffness of the salesman as the typical snobbery of old-world establishments. They didn't understand men like him, new kings who made their own rules. He never once considered the simple truth. Mr. Dubois was not a simple salesman. He was the chief operating officer of de la Cour's North American division, and had known Genevieve since she was a little girl who used to play hide-and-seek among the display cases. His loyalty was not to the highest bidder. His loyalty was to the throne. And immediately after Nate Caldwell had left the store, Antoine Dubois had picked up his private line and made a single, solemn phone call. It's done, he said into the receiver. "He bought the Midnight Star, and he used your name." A moment of silence on the other end, and then a soft, clear voice replied, a voice filled not with anger, but with a chilling, sad resolve. "Thank you, Antoine. Please proceed exactly as we discussed, and have the Regent's Starlight made ready for me tomorrow evening." Aura was less a restaurant and more a temple to minimalist luxury. Located in a discreet, unmarked Tribeca townhouse, its existence was spread only by word of mouth among the 0.01%. To dine there was to announce you had not just arrived, but had transcended. Nate had secured the most coveted spot, the single-table private dining room on the top floor, known as the Apex. Katerina was already there when he arrived, a vision in a crimson gown that clung to her like a second skin. She was posed against the window, the city lights her backdrop, a glass of champagne in her hand. She was art, and she knew it. "Nate, darling," she purred, gliding over to him. "You've outdone yourself. This place is impossible." "Nothing's impossible," he said, kissing her deeply. The scent of her perfume, something expensive and spicy, was intoxicating. "Especially not tonight." They settled at the table, a single slab of polished obsidian. The service was telepathic. Dishes appeared and disappeared, wine was poured, all in seamless silence. They talked about his latest triumph, a hostile takeover of a smaller tech rival. They talked about her upcoming gallery show. They talked about a future unencumbered by complication, a future that shimmered just beyond the horizon, a future without Genevieve. "You know," Katerina said, leaning forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "I saw your wife's name on the patrons list for the Delacour Gala tonight." So dull. "I can't imagine you in a room like that." "You and me both," Nate scoffed. "She likes her dusty charities. Let her have them. I prefer to celebrate in the here and now. With you." He reached under the table and brought out the sleek black Delacour box. Katerina's eyes widened, her perfectly composed mask of sophistication momentarily slipping. "Nate, what is this?" "I told you I had a surprise," he said, his voice thick with pride. "Something to show you how serious I am. About us." He opened the box. The Midnight Star lay on its velvet bed, absorbing the soft light of the room and radiating an aura of dark power. Katerina gasped, a genuine sharp intake of breath. She was speechless. She reached out a trembling hand, her fingers hovering over the massive black diamond. I've seen this in magazines," she whispered, her voice filled with awe. "It's the Midnight Star. They said a Saudi prince was trying to acquire it." "He was too slow," Nate said smugly, unclasping the necklace. "Turn around." She did her back bare and exposed. Nate lifted the cold, heavy weight of the diamonds and platinum. As he fastened the clasp at the nape of her neck, the necklace settled into place, a stunning, scandalous statement against her skin. She was his. This proved it. "It's perfect," he murmured, his hands on her shoulders. "It was made for you." Katerina turned back to face him, her eyes glittering as brightly as the jewels she now wore. This was it, the culmination of all her efforts, the checkmate. "No one has ever done anything like this for me," she said, her voice trembling with emotion, or something that passed for it. "This is just the beginning," Nate promised. "Once the divorce is finalized." He was cut off by a soft, polite cough from the doorway. One of the restaurant's hosts stood there, his face a mask of polite deference, yet his eyes held a flicker of something else, nervousness, perhaps even fear. "Mr. Caldwell, my sincerest apologies for the interruption," the host said, his voice barely a whisper. "But you have another guest." Nate frowned. "That's impossible. This room is booked for me, for 2 people. There must be a mistake." "There's no mistake, Nathaniel." The voice came from behind the host. It was quiet, yet it cut through the room with the chilling precision of a diamond blade. It was a voice he heard every day, a voice he had long ago stopped truly listening to. The host stepped aside, bowing his head slightly as if in the presence of royalty. And there, standing in the doorway, was Genevieve. She wasn't wearing the simple, elegant maternity dress he had expected. She was in a custom-made gown of deep sapphire silk that draped over her pregnant form with regal grace. Her hair, usually worn in a simple chignon, was swept up in an intricate style. She looked taller, more formidable than he had ever seen her. Her face was serene, but her sea-glass eyes were as hard and cold as the winter ocean. She looked from the necklace on Katerina's throat to the smug look on her husband's face, and a slow, sad smile touched her lips. The air in the Apex room, once warm with illicit celebration, suddenly turned ice-cold. Nate stared, his mind struggling to process what was happening. Katerina froze her hand instinctively, flying to the cold weight of the diamonds on her chest. Genevieve took a single step into the room. The game Nate thought he was playing was over. The real one was just about to begin. And Genevieve had just revealed that she held all the cards. For a long moment, the only sound in the Apex room was the faint, ambient hum of the city far below. Nate's mind raced, trying to formulate a response, a plausible lie, an accusation. How had she found him? Had she followed him? The audacity of it left him momentarily breathless. "Genevieve!" He finally managed, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "What the hell are you doing here? This is a private business dinner." Genevieve's gaze didn't waver from his. "Is that what you're calling it? Nate, business?" Her eyes flickered to Katerina, a dismissive, clinical glance, as if observing a specimen under glass. "I must say, Miss Petrov, that piece is particularly ill-suited to your complexion. It requires a certain substance to wear correctly. Otherwise, the stone simply wears you." Katerina flushed, a tide of scarlet creeping up her neck. "I don't know who you think you are." "Quiet," Genevieve said, not loudly, but with an authority that was so absolute, so unexpected that Katerina's mouth snapped shut. Nate stood up his chair, scraping harshly against the floor. "You will not speak to her that way. You will leave, now. We will discuss this at home." "No, Nathaniel," Genevieve said, taking another calm step into the room. "We will discuss this right here. And I'm afraid I won't be leaving. After all," she paused, allowing the words to hang in the air, "I own the restaurant." The statement was so absurd, so out of left field, that Nate almost laughed. "You what? Jen, have you been drinking? You're not well. You're pregnant, emotional." As if on cue, the restaurant's owner, the celebrated and notoriously reclusive chef Jean-Pierre Moreau, appeared behind Genevieve. He bowed his head. "Madame de la Cour," he said, his voice thick with a French accent and profound respect. "Is everything to your satisfaction?" Genevieve gave a slight nod. "Jean-Pierre, thank you for your discretion. Please ensure we are not disturbed again." "Of course, madame." The chef gave Nate a look of profound pity, before melting back into the shadows. Nate's brain felt like it was short-circuiting. Madame Delacour, not Caldwell. The name echoed in the silent room. He looked at his wife, truly looked at her for the first time in years. The quiet art historian was gone. In her place stood a woman of immense, unnerving poise. "And now," Genevieve continued, her voice the only sound for the main event. She turned slightly and nodded to someone standing out of sight in the hallway. Two figures entered. The first was Mr. Antoine Dubois, the silver-haired executive from the jewelry store. The second was a security guard in a plain, dark suit who was carrying a large, reinforced case. Dubois looked at Nate with the same opaque, unreadable expression he'd worn that afternoon. "What is this?" Nate demanded, his voice losing its confident edge. "A circus. In a way," Genevieve said softly. "You always did love a spectacle." Dubois placed the case on a nearby credenza and opened it with a quiet click. He lifted the object from within his movements, practiced and reverent. It wasn't a necklace. It wasn't a bracelet. It was a tiara. But it was unlike any tiara Nate had ever seen. It wasn't a delicate, modern confection of jewels. This was a piece of history of power, a magnificent, formidable creation of platinum and diamonds, with three massive, flawless sapphires at its peaks that seemed to hold the cold light of distant stars. It was breathtaking. It was terrifying. "This," Genevieve said, as Dubois approached her, "is the Regent's Starlight Tiara. It was commissioned in 1888 by my great-great-grandfather, Henri Delacour, for his wife. It is worn only by the head of the Delacour household and the chairperson of the Delacour global conglomerate. It hasn't been seen publicly in 50 years. With a grace that was almost ceremonial, Dubois gently placed the tiara on Genevieve's head. It settled perfectly into her swept-up hair, the sapphires glowing like blue fire above her calm, pale face. The transformation was absolute. She was no longer Genevieve Caldwell, the quiet, pregnant wife. She was a queen, ascending her throne. The weight of it seemed to straighten her spine, the power of it sharpening her gaze until it was unbearable to meet. Nate stared, his mouth agape. The pieces were crashing together in his head with the force of a tectonic collision. Her maiden name, the gala, her dusty books on jewelry and silverwork, her quiet trips to Geneva and Paris that he'd dismissed as shopping with friends. "You," he stammered the word, catching in his throat. "Delacour, you're not related to them." "I am them, Nathaniel," she said, her voice now resonating with the full weight of her legacy. "My name is Genevieve Aliénor Delacour. I am the majority shareholder and the acting CEO of the Delacour conglomerate, a conglomerate which includes Delacour Jewelers, a global logistics firm, a portfolio of luxury hotels, and a private equity fund that owns, among other things, this building." She took a step toward the table, her presence filling the room, diminishing everything else in it. Katerina seemed to physically shrink, her hand clutching the black diamond at her throat like a talisman that had just lost its magic. Genevieve's cold eyes finally settled on the necklace. "The Midnight Star," she said, her voice laced with a profound historical disdain. "A rather vulgar piece, in my opinion. We acquired the stone from a bankrupt Russian oligarch. We created the necklace for a specific type of client. New money, loud, desperate for validation, and utterly lacking in taste." Her gaze lifted to meet Nate's. "It seems we found our perfect customer." The silence that followed Genevieve's revelation was so profound, it felt like a physical pressure. Nate's world, once a solid, unshakable edifice of his own making, was crumbling into dust around him. He felt dizzy, his mind reeling from the sheer scale of the deception. His quiet wife, his simple, unassuming Genevieve, was a titan of industry, a figure of immense global power. He hadn't just married her. He had been permitted to exist in her orbit. "This is a joke," he finally breathed, a desperate last stand of denial. "Some elaborate, insane prank." "Do I look like I'm joking, Nathaniel?" Genevieve asked, her voice dangerously soft. The tiara on her head caught the light, casting sharp, brilliant facets across her face. She looked ethereal and terrifying. "Pranks are for children. This is a reckoning." She turned her attention to Mr. Dubois. "Antoine, please share your report from this afternoon's transaction." Dubois stepped forward, holding a slim tablet. He didn't look at Nate, addressing his words only to Genevieve. "At 14:37 hours, Mr. Caldwell purchased the Midnight Star necklace. He invoked his marital connection to you, madame, and aggressively requested a family discount. He was politely but firmly refused." A wave of hot, sickening shame washed over Nate. The memory of his arrogant condescension towards this man, who was clearly a high-level executive in his wife's empire, made his stomach clench. He also insisted on a number of unusual measures of discretion. Dubois continued, his voice dry and factual. He paid with his personal account, requested the receipt be sent to a non-business email, and had the item delivered to a private mailbox address in Chelsea, registered under a shell corporation. Genevieve's eyes bored into Nate. "A shell corporation? Nate, so much effort to hide a gift for your business dinner. You see, I was willing to believe for a time that this was just a simple, sordid affair. A pathetic midlife crisis from a man who has achieved too much too soon. I was prepared to divorce you quietly to let you keep your company and your pride. But then I wondered why. Why? Katerina Petrov." She shifted her gaze to Katerina, who was now pale as a ghost, the $2 million necklace looking like a funeral wreath around her neck. "You're ambitious, Miss Petrov," Genevieve stated. "I'll give you that. Your rise in the art world has been meteoric, almost unnaturally so. So my people did some digging. It's amazing what you can find when you own one of the world's most sophisticated private security firms." Nate's head snapped toward his wife. "Security firm. How deep did this go?" "We started by looking at your finances," Genevieve went on, circling the table like a shark. "A curator's salary doesn't quite cover a couture wardrobe and a condo in a Jean Nouvel building. We found a series of wire transfers, very cleverly hidden, originating from an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. An account which, after a little more work, we traced back to a holding company owned by the Rochefort family. At the mention of the name Rochefort, a flicker of genuine fear finally broke through Katerina's composure. The Rocheforts were Delacour's oldest and most bitter rivals, a French dynasty of jewelers known for their aggressive and often underhanded tactics. The Rocheforts have been trying to force a merger with us for a decade." Genevieve explained, her voice now steel. "They've tried market manipulation, poaching our designers' corporate espionage, but they never had a way to get inside, until they found you, Nate. A man with an ego so large and an awareness so small. You were the perfect key to unlock my door." She stopped directly in front of Katerina. "You weren't his mistress, were you, Miss Petrov? You were his handler. Your job was to get close to him, create a scandal and force a messy public divorce. The ensuing chaos, the media attention, my emotional distress due to the pregnancy, it would all be a perfect distraction. Rochefort's stock analysts predicted it would depress Delacour's share price by at least 8%. Enough for them to initiate a hostile takeover bid. Katerina stared, horrified. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. "They chose their weapon well," Genevieve said, turning back to Nate. "They gave you a mistress who mirrored your own shallow ambition, and they bet correctly that you would be too blinded by vanity to see the trap. They knew you would do something spectacularly stupid to impress her, and you did." She gestured to the Midnight Star. "You took my family's money funneled through our joint accounts, which I so generously funded, and used it to buy a Delacour necklace to adorn a Rochefort agent all, while standing in my family's flagship store and trying to use my name to get a discount. The sheer pathetic irony is almost a work of art." She let the devastating summary hang in the air. The affair wasn't just a betrayal. It was an act of corporate treason he had unwittingly committed against his own wife. He wasn't a player. He was the pawn. "As for you, Miss Petrov," Genevieve said, her voice dropping the last vestiges of warmth, "the Rocheforts don't take kindly to failure. Your accounts were frozen an hour ago. A dossier of your activities, including evidence of industrial espionage, has been delivered to the district attorney's office and to Interpol. You will be lucky if you are ever allowed to curate a high school art show again. Now," her voice was a whip crack, "take off my necklace." With trembling, clumsy fingers, Katerina unfastened the clasp. The Midnight Star. Her symbol of victory slithered from her neck. She held it out her hand, shaking violently. Genevieve didn't take it. "Antoine," she commanded. Mr. Dubois stepped forward with a velvet pouch, and Katerina dropped the necklace into it, as if it were burning her skin. "Get out," Genevieve said, her voice flat and final, "before I have you thrown out." Without a word, without a single glance at the man she had so expertly manipulated, Katerina Petrov grabbed her clutch and fled the room, her crimson dress a smear of color vanishing into the darkness. She left behind the scent of expensive perfume and utter ruin. Nate was alone, facing the woman he thought he knew, who now wore a crown of sapphires and an expression of absolute judgment. The personal humiliation was immense, but it was about to be dwarfed by something far, far worse. Nate stood amidst the wreckage of his life, the silence of the apex room pressing in on him. Katerina was gone. The lie was exposed. But he still had one thing left: his company, his creation, Nexus Dynamics. It was his identity, his masterpiece, the source of his power. He had built it from the ground up. He clung to that thought like a drowning man to a piece of driftwood. "You've had your fun, Genevieve," he said, his voice raspy. "You've made your point. You're rich. Richer than I ever imagined. Congratulations. But this changes nothing. Nexus Dynamics is mine. My name is on every patent, every line of code. You can't touch that." Genevieve regarded him with a look of profound, almost sorrowful pity. "Oh, Nathaniel," she sighed, "you still don't understand. Do you? You've never understood anything." She gestured to an empty chair. "Please, sit down. There's one last piece of business to discuss." Reluctantly, he sank into the chair opposite her. She remained standing, a monarch holding court. Mr. Dubois stood silently by her side, a loyal sentinel. "Nexus Dynamics," she began, her tone shifting to that of a CEO at a board meeting. "A brilliant concept, I'll admit. Your algorithm is revolutionary, but ideas, even brilliant ones, are worthless without capital. and you needed a great deal of capital to get started. I got my seed funding from venture capitalists, Nate shot back. Westwood Capital Partners. They saw my genius and they backed me. Yes, Westwood Capital, Genevieve said with a nod. An excellent firm, very discerning. So discerning, in fact, that they rarely invest in a solo founder with no track record and a high burn rate concept like yours. It was a remarkably high-risk bet for them. Have you ever wondered why they took it? A cold dread, colder than anything he had felt all night, began to snake its way up Nate's spine. He said nothing. Westwood Capital Partners, Genevieve continued, her voice a precise surgical instrument, is a wholly owned subsidiary of the Delacour Private Equity Fund, the same fund that owns this restaurant. Nate's blood ran cold. No. Yes, she affirmed. Your seed money, your Series A, your Series B funding. Every dollar that allowed you to build your company came from my company. I was your sole financial backer from the very beginning. I read your business plan the night you left it on our kitchen counter 6 years ago. It was promising, so I made a call. She began to pace slowly, her sapphire gown, whispering against the floor. I wanted to see what you would become. I wanted you to feel like you had built it yourself. I thought that if you achieved the success you so desperately craved, you might finally outgrow the insecurity that drives you. I thought you might finally see me as a partner, not a possession. It was I now see a foolishly romantic experiment. Nate felt the floor drop out from beneath him. His entire life. His self-made narrative. It was all a lie, a carefully constructed illusion funded and maintained by the woman he had just tried to discard. He was not a king. He was a court jester, given a papier-mâché crown and allowed to believe it was gold. The contracts you signed with Westwood Capital, Genevieve went on, her voice relentless, contained a standard morals clause, a clause that is triggered by any action on your part that could bring the company, its investors, or its partners into public disrepute. Actions like, for example, engaging in a scandalous public affair that is discovered to be a clumsy attempt at corporate espionage against your primary investor. She stopped in front of him, looking down at the broken man in the chair. As of an hour ago, the board of Westwood Capital convened an emergency meeting. Citing a flagrant breach of the morals clause, they voted unanimously to exercise their rights under the investor agreement. They have recalled all outstanding loans and liquidated their position. They have activated the key man risk provision, removing you as CEO and chairman of Nexus Dynamics, effective immediately. You can't do that, Nate choked out, scrambling for a foothold in his collapsing reality. The shareholders, I am the shareholders, Nate, she corrected him gently. Through various holding companies, my fund controls 78% of your company's stock, or rather, my company's stock. The finality of it hit him with the force of a physical blow. He had lost everything. The mistress, the wife, the money. And now the one thing that defined him, his company. He was nothing. A hollowed-out shell of a man stripped bare in a private dining room that his wife owned. Why? He whispered, the fight gone from his voice, replaced by a raw, gaping wound of incomprehension. Why would you do all this? Genevieve looked at him, and for a fleeting moment he saw not the queen in the tiara, but the woman he had married. He saw the flicker of hurt, the deep well of disappointment in her eyes. Because you didn't just break our vows, Nathaniel. she said, her voice quiet but devastating. You broke my heart, and then you tried to use my family's to do it. My family, my legacy. That is something I will protect at any cost. You built your empire, and I let you. Now you will watch as I tear it down to the foundations. Consider it the price of your education. She turned to her loyal COO. Antoine, please have security escort Mr. Caldwell from the premises. He is no longer a guest here. His belongings will be packed and sent to his lawyer's office in the morning. Change the locks on the penthouse. Yes, madame. Two large men in dark suits appeared in the doorway. They were not the restaurant's hosts. They were part of Genevieve's private security detail. They moved with an efficiency that was terrifying. Nate didn't resist. He was beyond fighting. As they gently but firmly lifted him to his feet and guided him towards the door, he took one last look at his wife. She stood tall and immovable, the regent's starlight. Tiara glittering on her head, her hand resting protectively on the unborn heir to the Delacour empire. She was not looking at him. She was looking out at the city lights, at the glittering kingdom that was and always had been hers. 6 months later, the spring sun streamed through the vast arched windows of the Delacour headquarters in Geneva. The office was a masterpiece of old-world elegance and modern power. Antique tapestries hung on walls paneled with pale oak, but the massive desk in the center was a single piece of glass and steel covered in holographic displays. Geneviève Delacour sat behind it, not in a tiara, but in a sharply tailored business suit that exuded quiet authority. In a state-of-the-art bassinet beside her desk, her son Henri, named for the dynasty's founder, slept peacefully. Her life had been reborn personally and professionally. Motherhood had not softened her. It had forged her resolve into something unbreakable. On the display before her were the final acquisition documents. She swiped her finger across the glass, her signature authorizing the final transfer of funds. It's done, she said, her voice crisp and clear on the conference call. As of this morning, Rochefort Gems is officially a subsidiary of the Delacour conglomerate. The acquisition had been a masterstroke, crippled by the public scandal of their failed espionage attempt and a subsequent internal investigation that revealed years of corruption the Rochefort family had been forced to sell. Geneviève had bought her rivals for pennies on the dollar, absorbing their assets, their minds, and their best designers, effectively ending a century of competition in a single decisive move. She hadn't just won the war. She had redrawn the entire map. A voice on the call, that of her lead counsel, cleared his throat. And Madame there is the final matter of Mr. Caldwell. Genevieve's expression did not change. Go on. The SEC has concluded its investigation prompted by our internal audit of Nexus Dynamics. They found significant evidence of wire fraud and securities violations related to his attempts to hide assets prior to your divorce proceedings. They're pressing charges. Given his lack of resources, he'll be lucky to avoid prison time. I see, she said, her tone neutral. Nate was no longer a person to her. He was a loose end, a line item on a report. His fall had been as swift and total as his rise had been illusory. Stripped of his company, his wealth and his reputation, he had become a ghost in the city he once believed he owned. He was a cautionary tale whispered at cocktail parties. And Katerina Petrov, she asked, a flicker of curiosity in her eyes. Vanished, the lawyer replied. Interpol has a warrant out for her, but she seems to have dropped off the face of the earth. The general consensus is that the Rocheforts, or their former associates, silenced her to prevent her from testifying. She played a dangerous game and lost spectacularly. "A predictable outcome," Genevieve murmured. She looked over at her sleeping son, his small chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. The world she was building was for him, a world of strength, integrity, and consequence, a world where value was not measured in carats or dollars, but in honor and legacy. She ended the call and rose from her desk, walking to the vast window that overlooked Lake Geneva. The water was calm and clear, reflecting the endless blue of the sky. She had walked through fire, betrayed by the man she had loved, and had emerged not scarred but purified. She had learned the brutal lesson that sometimes the only way to protect what you love is to become the thing your enemies fear. She was Geneviève Delacour. She was a mother. She was a CEO. She was the queen of an empire built on brilliance and beauty, and her reign was just beginning. A year had passed. The seasons had turned, and with them the pages of a new chapter in Geneviève Delacour's life. The world no longer saw her as a wronged wife, but as a formidable matriarch, the undisputed titan of the luxury world. Her acquisition of the Rochefort Empire was taught as a case study in business schools, a masterclass in turning personal betrayal into corporate conquest. Her days were a meticulously scheduled ballet of board meetings, design approvals, and philanthropic endeavors. Yet the most important moments were the quiet ones. In the evenings in the restored Caldwell penthouse, now stripped of Nate's cold minimalist taste and filled with the warm historic elegance she preferred the most powerful woman in the jewelry industry, could be found on the floor, building a tower of blocks with her son. Henri was a year old now, with her calm green eyes and a grasp that was already surprisingly firm. He was her heart, her purpose, the future of the Delacour name. It was during one of these quiet evenings that a letter arrived. It was not delivered by a courier, but came in a plain envelope with a standard stamp mixed in with the less important mail. The return address was a federal correctional institution in Otisville, New York. Nate. She hadn't heard from him since the day he was escorted from Aura. Her lawyers had handled everything. She knew he had taken a plea deal, his spirit and finances so utterly broken that a trial was an impossibility. Seeing his familiar looping script on the cheap paper felt like finding a shard of glass in a silk cushion. With a sigh, she opened it, her hand resting on Henri's sleeping head in her lap. Genevieve. They let us write one letter a month. I've written this one 100 times in my head. I know you will probably burn it, and I wouldn't blame you. There are no words to apologize for what I did. I was a fool blinded by a reflection of myself I thought I wanted. Being here, everything is stripped away. The money, the titles, the noise. All you have is time to think about what was real. And the only real thing in my life was you. And him. I don't ask for your forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I find myself thinking about legacy. What a man leaves behind. I built an empire I thought was mine, and it vanished like Soitou. It was never real. You have a real one. Our son has a real one. I don't know what I'm asking for. Maybe just a photo. To know what he looks like. To know that a part of me, the only good part, the part that came from you, is out there in the world. So I can tell myself I didn't destroy everything of value. Nate Genevieve folded the letter, her expression unreadable. The words were pathetic, steeped in self-pity, yet they struck a chord she hadn't anticipated. Legacy. The word he had once mocked her for valuing was now his only solace. His letter, meant to be an appeal, felt like a final ironic validation of her entire existence. The letter unsettled her. It made her consider her own legacy with a new intensity. She wasn't just its protector anymore. She was its author, and Henri would be its reader. She decided the Delacour archives, stored in the climate-controlled vaults beneath the Geneva headquarters, needed to be fully digitized. Every design, every transaction, every letter from the company's 150-year history would be preserved in a perfect, immutable record for her son. She wanted him to see the flawless, honorable story of his heritage. A month later, she was in Geneva, standing in the subterranean chill of the main vault. It was a cathedral of history, smelling of old paper metal and time itself. As technicians in white gloves carefully scanned century-old ledgers, Genevieve found herself drawn to the private family section, a place even most board members had never seen. Here were the personal effects of her ancestors. Tucked away in a safe behind a portrait of the founder, Henri Delacour, was a set of leather-bound books she had never seen before. They weren't official ledgers. They were his private journals. Driven by the same impulse that had prompted the entire digitization project, she took the first volume to a private study. The journal began with his dreams of being the greatest jeweler in Europe. It detailed his early struggles, his passion for stones, his love for his wife. It was the noble story she had always known. But as she got to the entries for the year 1888, the same year the Regent's Starlight Tiara was commissioned, the tone began to change. He wrote of an obsession, a stone he needed to acquire to make his name. It was called the Star of Valois, a massive, uniquely colored diamond, owned by a minor but ancient aristocratic family, the House of Valois. The family, led by Duke Armand Valois, had refused to sell. It was their ancestral heirloom. Genevieve read, her blood slowly turning to ice. Henri's entries became darker, more clinical. He wrote not of negotiation, but of strategy. He had discovered through paid informants that Duke Valois's eldest son had a gambling addiction and a mountain of illicit debt that would disgrace the family name. The journal entry for October 12, 1888, was written in a chillingly precise hand. Presented the Duke with a choice this morning. He sells me the Star of Valois for a pittance of its worth, or I deliver his son's markers to the royal court and every banker in Paris. His son would be ruined, their name disgraced forever. The Duke wept, a pathetic sight. But legacy demands sacrifice. His for mine. The next entry a week later was triumphant. The stone is mine. The Duke delivered it himself, his hands trembling. He looked like a dead man walking. I shall recut it, rename it. The Son of Geneva. It will be the cornerstone of my new collection. Delacour is eternal. Valois is a memory. Genevieve felt sick. She closed the journal, her hands trembling. The foundation of her empire, the cornerstone of the legacy she had waged war to protect, was not a masterpiece of commerce. It was the fruit of extortion built on the ruin of another family. Her great-great-grandfather, the icon whose portrait hung in every Delacour boardroom, was not a noble visionary. He was a ruthless predator. He was, in his own way, a Nathaniel Caldwell, but on a grander, more successful scale. The irony was crushing. She had stripped Nate of his false legacy while championing her own, never realizing it too, was built on a lie. Her righteous indignation felt hollow, her crown suddenly heavy with the ghosts of the past. For a day she did nothing. She was adrift. She could put the journal back in the vault, lock it away, and the world would never know. Her son would inherit the perfect, sanitized legend. But as she watched Henri take his first stumbling steps in her Geneva suite, she knew she couldn't. What was the point of vanquishing the liars in her life if she was to become one herself? Her reign, she decided in that moment, would be different. It would not be defined by the perfection of its myth, but by the courage to face its truths. The next morning, she called a meeting with her chief legal counsel and head historian. "I have a new project for you," she said, her voice calm and resolute. "I want you to find any living descendants of Duke Armand Valois, every last one, and I want a complete accounting of what their family lost after the year 1888. The lawyer looked confused. "Madame, may I ask why?" Genevieve stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city her ancestor had conquered. "Because," she said, her voice filled with a power that was deeper and more profound than any she had wielded before, "the House of Delacour has a century-old debt to repay, and my legacy will be the one that settles the account." So what is the true measure of power? Is it the $2 million necklace, a loud, flashy declaration meant to buy loyalty? Or is it the silent, heavy crown, a symbol of a legacy you were born to protect? Nathaniel Caldwell believed power was something you could take, something you could build on a foundation of lies and ego. He learned in the most devastating way possible that true power is not built, but earned. It's the quiet confidence of knowing who you are, the strength to protect your legacy, and the courage to reclaim your throne, even from the person sleeping next to you. Genevieve Delacour played the long game, proving that the most dangerous opponent is the one you underestimate. What did you think of her ultimate revenge? Was it a cold, calculated masterpiece, or a heartbreaking necessity? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of betrayal and triumph, don't forget to hit that like button. Share this video with someone who loves a good story, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel for more tales of power, passion, and deception. Turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Thank you for listening.